Everybody, and welcome to today's Lean-In. I'm Michael Linke, the General Manager here at the Australian Institute of Architects. A very warm welcome to you, and again, a very warm welcome to those who are our frequent leaners who join us every Tuesday and Thursday. Great to have you with us again. Today, we're really fortunate to have a fantastic session. We're really very pleased to be able to welcome Dr. Christine Clifford to our Lean-In today. Christine will help us utilise a broad set of skills that we already have as architects and in times of dealing with uncertainty. And Christine's going to guide us for about the next 15 or 20 minutes to gently challenge our way of thinking and show us the difference that fresh perspectives can make. Dr. Christine Clifford, PhD, is a clinical psychologist based in Tasmania, and she has been with the University of Tasmania's School of Medicine since 1993. Christine's interests in research focus very much on communication in the medical setting and, of course, mental health education. And prior to joining UTAS, Christine held positions with the University of Melbourne, with the Australian National Twin Registry, the Tasmanian Mental Health Service Commission, and also the Royal Hobart Hospital. So she's very well equipped to talk about today's subject, about how we deal with uncertainty in the light of COVID-19. And of course, this follows last Thursday's session in looking at mental health. And this will be the final session that we do run on mental health. And we're very, very pleased to have you with us, Christine. Welcome. Great to have you on board. And over to you to talk to us about how you deal, or guide us on how you deal with uncertainty.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, actually. Thank you very much for asking me to be here. There's a lot of psychologists working busily around the world now on Zoom or, of course, on the phone. And it's nice to be able to share a few ideas with you. I think I should add, just before we talk about the presentation in more detail, I think I should add that a lot of what I'm bringing to the table today is a long experience of working with people who are most certainly facing uncertainty. And a lot of my work has been with people who have chronic illness, and that also includes chronic illness that could at the end be a terminal illness. So they're a very good group of people to learn from in terms of working with uncertainty. So I might just share my screen with you. So what I'm going to do today, rather than going into perhaps the thoughts, feelings and emotions that people might be experiencing, is to say to you that you've probably already got an enormous amount of skills that people in other circumstances will not do, and to give you just a few key ideas about how to unhook from the anxiety, the low mood, the exhaustion that, of course, so many people are feeling at the present time. Oops, don't seem to be. Okay. So one of the things that happens when you've been a psychologist for 30 odd years is that you see lots of different people from lots of different professions. And certainly I'd have to say in my clinical life that I've had the pleasure of seeing people from the profession of architecture. I guess I've listened carefully to what they have said. I hope I listen carefully to all my clients, but I do have a bit of an interest in buildings, being the daughter of someone who was a builder and the wife of someone who's worked in that kind of area. So I guess I've had a little bit of an idea of what goes on in those kind of industries. So it's always struck me that architecture is a profession with a great deal of uncertainty. And it's an interesting comparison, for example, with someone who's doing medicine instead of architecture. I guess at the end of a medical degree, you know that you're going to have work and you're going to have regular work. And it's really clear to you what your roles and responsibilities are. And nevertheless, in architecture, you have a very long training. And perhaps the actual professional outcome is much more variable than in something like medicine. I think the other thing that is so interesting, and you'll forgive me for taking a very psychological perspective here, is that the job is certainly, as far as I can see, only partially involved with all those wonderful skills of design and innovation and using new products, and of course now a lot of emphasis on things being environmentally sustainable and things of that nature. You can tell I watch a lot of grand designs. So there's that side of it. But and obviously financial concerns and regulations and all those things. But I guess the other really interesting thing is that it is actually actualizing in a building somebody's dream and somebody's way of saying, I'm this important and I'm this special. And of course, once you are involved with somebody's sense of themselves, that becomes a very, very big responsibility. And it's very difficult, isn't it, to read what somebody really wants from you and to get that right, particularly because what they really want from you is quite likely to change. I guess the other thing that's important is that there are quiet times and busy times, as far as I can see it, in the profession of architecture. And I think we all know that if we're quiet and we haven't got a lot of people wanting our services, it's very easy to feel that there's, something wrong with us, or we're not doing a good job, or other really unhelpful thoughts like, it's so quiet now, maybe I'm not going to get any more work. So it's a complex profession, and so people that survive in your profession have got a lot of skills, and I think probably uncertainty is one of the biggest. Of course, the other thing about an uncertain profession is obviously in these times where there's an external uncertainty, probably that increases the level of vulnerability in your profession. I have no way of knowing, but just walking up and down the rather steep hill that I live on, it seems to me that building projects are still happening, small building projects in terms of residential, but I'm sure that for everybody, uncertain professions do have increased vulnerability when the vulnerability is external. But as I was speaking to Michael earlier on, he was saying that everyone's pretty busy, and in some ways the online environment is not working so badly. I think two things that we do have to focus on without being in any way negative is that obviously what we're preparing for is not a sprint, it is a marathon. So it's really important that we have some strategies to keep ourselves well and strong and moving forward, because it'll be a while before we find ourselves back in the office. I wrote the sort of skeleton of this PowerPoint probably about 4 weeks ago. And I noticed that I said that the situation is changing hourly and that we have an overload of information, particularly in the media. I don't really think that that has changed, except of course that for the moment, things are better than we could have feared. In fact, I guess working in a school of medicine, I do spend an enormous amount of time talking to people who are medical doctors, and I suppose they would say that the danger point will be actually when we come out of lockdown, because in any places, and particularly here in Tasmania, where we did have some infected people in the north of the state, you can see for yourselves that once the cat gets out of the bag, it can be a bit of a problem. So it's still really all changing, isn't it? Okay, so starting with a bit of ancient history, I guess for all of us, it's not what happens to us, but it's how we react to it that matters. So life can throw us good things and it can throw us bad things, but we do actually have the potential to manage that and moderate that and have a better outcome inside our heads. And of course, everyone talks about what goes on inside our heads as if it is a different thing. Of course, our heads and bodies are connected, so it's very important to keep our headspace healthy, and then we will manage better ourselves. So I'm just going to point you to a few resources that I think are extremely helpful. They're very accessible and they're very straightforward, but the most important thing is that they're very effective. I just digress for a moment to tell you a little bit about the works of Russ Harris, and I guess one of his most famous books is The Happiness Trap. And he talks about many things, but today we'll just mention this trouble of fusion. So I've attended some trainings with him, and like a lot of trainers, he's very dynamic and very positive, speaks very plainly, and the thing I most like about him is that he writes in an accessible, understandable way. So at that time in my life, I was running a psycho-oncology clinic. So that was a clinic for the cancer patients at the Royal Hobart Hospital, dealing principally with their psychological needs. And I thought the work that Russ Harris did was so helpful that it would be nice if all the clients could have a copy of this particular book, The Happiness Trap, which isn't about happiness at all, incidentally. That might be the trap. Anyway, a lot of the clients in public hospital system just didn't have the resources to buy a book. So I literally ordered cases of The Happiness Trap from the book depository at an excellent price, and for every single patient I gave them a copy of the book, and I did that for about 1.5 years, and I didn't collect the data and I didn't publish it, but I would say that there's two important things I'd like to share with you. There was one person who read it and she didn't think, I think she had a background in literature and she didn't think he was a very good writer. There was another person I didn't suggest it to for a range of reasons. His personality style I thought might not be a helpful thing for him. He came in and said, I've seen that on your desk twice and I've been and bought it and now I'm practicing diffusing my thoughts. And the third person said, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to see you anymore. Anyway, she came back about 15 months later, and this is being recorded, so I won't use the expletives, but she came back and she said, I suppose I'm another convert to that expletive book. So it's a useful resource. So what Russ Harris talks about is that we do have to be very mindful of the fact that thoughts are actually just thoughts. All these thoughts that run through our head are kind of background processing, and the biggest mistake is that we believe our own thought traffic. It's not a good idea. Your thought traffic tends to focus on the negative. It draws up all the things that went wrong in the past, and it draws up all the things that you think will go wrong in the future. It's just not helpful. So we just have to understand that our thoughts are just thoughts, and that we don't need to get caught up with them and expand them. And I'm sure all of us as human beings know that the very most important time not to do that is at 3 o'clock in the morning, when all our biological systems are at their lowest ebb, and the extent that we can build a small concern into a mountain has no boundaries. So we just have to practice watching what are our thought processes doing, and just try to blow them away, just push them away, just move on to something else. Don't give our unhelpful thoughts too much credit. I'm sure there's an e-book of this. I know there is. Very, very useful way of working, just managing our thinking, just like we'd manage anything else. Obviously, the media are not helpful in this. They seem to be hell-bent on producing every bad thought one can imagine. So I just now want to move to something else, which is a game changer. It's really important, and this is about meditation and mindfulness meditation. So when I was a young psychologist, we still used to teach things like meditation, but it was an act of faith on our part that it was good for us. I mean, that's not strictly true, of course, because certainly in various religious and cultural backgrounds, we've known it's a useful skill forever. And obviously the Western world doesn't have the biggest database on that. But one of the things that is an absolute game changer is that all the new neuroscientific research, the neurobiology research, is understanding the brain and the brain's capacity for neuroplasticity. We're not in the time in history where we feel that, you know, the brain is welded into position at a particular time in our lives. There is always scope for neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is how we build new ideas, new thoughts, new approaches, all of which I guess are going to be necessary going forward now, but they were always necessary going forward. Forward means developing new thoughts, ideas, and approaches. I guess the most exciting thing to my way of thinking is that once upon a time, and this is particularly true in the cancer field, people thought it was necessary to meditate for inordinate amounts of time to get a beneficial effect. We now know that 18 minutes meditation a day will provide the opportunity for the brain to make improved ability for neuroplasticity. So really what it's saying is that meditation opens up your brain to change the way you think or do something and have a better outcome. There are huge amounts of ways you can access this. And the one I tend to recommend is Headspace. It is a UK one, it's not Australian. Headspace. I recommend it because on balance, most people like it and find it easy, but there are many, many others. So the take-home message is 20 minutes a day of some form of meditative practice, very, very helpful. The other thing that's obviously things that you know about is exercise, but very interesting explosion of understanding now that healthy gut and healthy mind are completely connected to one another. And so when in in the context of psychology, we say healthy eating. What we mean is if you're looking after your gut well, then your head will benefit from that. And I'm sure you're probably very well aware that all the neurotransmitters in the brain are also produced in the gut. So if you're keeping your gut happy, then the same transmitters, the serotonin, the dopamine that is in your brain, everyone's feeling better for a gut that is eating well. And probably all of us are not eating so well because we're experiencing the joys of baking and chocolate and the like, but healthy gut, healthy mind. Just to be a little bit boring, I guess the other things are that, you know, for any mind-altering substances, we need to be a bit careful. Alcohol, much as we enjoy it at the time, does actually depress the central nervous system. Marijuana in high levels can cause poor motivation and depression, which can have a paranoid aspect to it. If you were watching a lot of media and a little bit paranoid, that would not be a good look. And the other thing, of course, is the goal-directed tasks you do have control over. I'm not going on any excursions at the moment, but I do understand that the lines at the tip are absolutely enormous. I think we're all having a goal-directed tidy at the moment. So I just want to put this in. It's a little bit of a side note. This is a model that I would work with a lot in helping someone deal with the need for major change. And it's just something I thought is worth us all thinking. So really, we're all going down this little pathway, aren't we? We're all doing life completely differently. There are some things that are not good about that, and there are some things that are okay. And obviously what we're doing at the moment is we've given up the role and we've noticed the things that we're not being able to do. I don't know about you, but I've acquired a lot of new skills in this new space. My teaching at the School of Medicine is all about communication and mental illness and loss and grief, which I would hazard to say is a topic best taught face to face, which I've done for many years, but it is amazing what you can do. So acquiring new skills, developing new attachments and support groups. I think this Zoom environment is a lifeline for a lot of people, and we find new ways of supporting one another. And also, of course, recognising the positive aspects of the way things are now. So I just put that there for you because I think it's important to understand that even, I think Michael said you're 7 weeks in, I think I'm 6. Even now you can have a day where you're in the morning role, you're having a sad sack day. That's perfectly normal. This is a process. It's not a decision, it's a process. And all these stages are useful, and they're useful to go through. I think another thing is that all of this needs courage. People have very different understandings of the word courage, but I think a useful understanding of courage is that when we're in a period of uncertainty, the first part of courage is to face it. Denial's not helpful. And the second stage of it, and the most important word here, is the courage to act on it. Making things better is all about action. It's very rarely just about thinking. Atul Gawande is a huge writer in medicine, but he writes very accessible material, and you may have come across his works. And I think it's just so incredibly powerful. In the end, you have to decide whether it's your fears or your hopes that should matter most. And I guess this is a time where, on a good sunny day, we should all be letting our life be run by our hopes. But it is balance. It's not a fixed state. And that, just the same as the stages of coming to terms with change. One day it doesn't feel like that, and another day it feels it might. So just a summary, and I really don't need to go through it, I'm sure, but do what makes you feel good, some physical exercise, avoid too much of any of the mind-altering substances, do watch your thinking, and the media, don't let them hijack your good sense. Understand that it's a big adjustment, and try and live through this difficult position in a position of hope and not one of fear. So I'm sure that small PowerPoint will be available to you should you wish to have another look, and I'll stop sharing and come back.
Thank you, Christine. Some good comments have come through, and I've written down some questions as well. You talked about alcohol being a supportive tool, and I think just in my sort of, I suppose, in the connections that I've had with architects and my sort of friends and networks, there is this overt reliance on alcohol. And, you know, the terms have been bandied around maybe in a jokey form that, you know, we have this sort of high functioning alcoholism that we'll return to the office with. I don't think we have an issue with the marijuana that you were talking about as well. I don't see that being something that is affecting us as a group of highly trained professionals. But I do want to talk about control. You know, it's been said to me many times, as architects, highly trained, very, very highly trained professionals, you know, is it true that the more highly trained, or you're in a specific environment or profession in which you exercise a lot of control over the build, control over the budgets, control over the project management end to end? And when we are faced with something like COVID-19, a lot of that control is taken away, and architects and other professionals, whatever profession that may be, can react in anger or lash out. Do you see that true? The more higher educated you are, the more you react to conditions outside your control?
Well, I think that's definitely the case, that the more educated we are, we're normally in positions that are, you know, where we're holding all the chips, and we expect to be able to line things up in the way that they need to be. So I think that's right. And when you talk about anger, I mean, all those things are really the stages of grief. You know, it doesn't feel like it used to feel, and you go through those stages of, it's absolutely terrible, I'm livid about this, to, or maybe it's not so bad, to what's the point, I can't make it how I want it to be, and just kind of cycle round that. I think you've only got to look at some of the things that come from the media at the moment when they're talking to doctors. I mean, I think the doctors have been unbelievably distressed, really, by the fact that they haven't really got the tools for this new virus. You know, what they would normally do in a similar circumstance hasn't worked, and that's keep rolling out, isn't it, that things are happening like that.
I think another one, and this was mentioned in the chat, you made a statement earlier that everybody's busy. That, I think that is the case generally, but there are pockets of inactivity. There are pockets and areas across Australia which have really seen a downturn in productivity and output, and that's really regrettable, and that is obviously due to the current pandemic that we're facing, with restrictions in terms of access to building sites and whatever else. What's your recommendation, your advice, your guidance to people who might be feeling insecure around you know, just seeing their workload drop? Because I'll tell you, for architects, generally we're going okay at the moment. 3 months down the track, who knows? This is where we really could be facing dire situations. It could be well down the track. So while things may appear somewhat rosy, so what's your opinion? What's your guidance? What's your advice to us in terms of looking long term, but also the short term I suppose, guidance and steps to avoid the nervousness and the insecurity one feels when we are seeing work dropping rather?
Yes, I didn't ask you beforehand, and I should have asked, because I don't actually know, obviously, as a non-architect, what's happening right now in your profession. I suppose if I sort of take a Russ Harris approach, just because it matches with the PowerPoint, I guess it's a bit of analysis of how is that despairing thought helpful for me? Is this an opportunity? Is this time an opportunity to get on top of something that may well be useful to me to take forward once the doors are more open? It is very unfortunate though, and actually it's not, it is also somewhat true in psychology world, that sometimes your books are absolutely full and sometimes they're quite slender. And it is very hard not to evaluate yourself in terms of how many people are seeking your services. And in our society, it is very hard to have a high evaluation of yourself if your bank balance is descending steeply, with not a lot of prospect of it going back in an upward direction in a hurry. I suppose it's probably, most people would say it's learning that you need to value yourself for things other than your professional activity. That's where the highly trained people get themselves into trouble, because it's such a journey to get there. It's such a journey to sustain your professional. It becomes your identity. It's important to remember we are actually more than that. But I don't think there's any point in denying that these are worrying times for everybody going forward, from a financial and professional point of view. But if you're having a bad day, you just do have to give yourself the reminder that how is this helping me? What could I be doing in this minute now that might help me? Is that when I fly out the door and walk up the hill, or is that when I think, yeah, I will do that online learning that I wanted to do, but I haven't done it? There's a lot of people at university again at the moment learning languages and things.
Yeah, it's a very good point, isn't it? You talked about distinct stages as well when it comes through to, at the start of COVID-19, I've been keeping quite an elaborate diary, just in terms of emotions. And something I've never really been good at is talking about those sort of things. But, at the start it was confusion, it was chaos, it was panic, and then it's now gone into acceptance. And in some ways, it's gone into reluctance. I'm much more productive where I am now than having to take the significant commute into the office, battle through crowds at train stations, incur expense on tickets and what have you, and then get into the office only to, have effectively saved the time at home. Are you seeing a shift in terms of our future new normal? Do you see a lot more in terms of your engagement with people? Do you see a lot more work from home based commerce in the future?
I think that's it's absolutely fascinating. It wouldn't have been even, say, 3 to 4 weeks in, it was completely clear. I can talk about two roles. I mean, as a university teacher, I think they'd probably really quite like it if we all stayed in our spare bedrooms. We were excluded from the university almost immediately to work at home, and they've closed down buildings. We weren't the quickest. I think ANU was the quickest university to do that. So that's I guess it would be much more cost effective in many ways if a degree could be delivered online. I guess medicine and psychology and I'm quite sure architecture, there are practical things that you have to do that you probably couldn't do from home. So that's a change. I would say that consulting as a clinical psychologist, almost immediately, it was made very clear that as far as the Australian Psychological Society was concerned and Medicare, they were not expecting any of us really to go back exclusively to face-to-face. So that has lots of flow-ons, because there's all these psychology practices where people might not go back in the door again.
For us at the Institute, I think it's interesting because we are now looking at maybe developing and offering our members a co-working space, because there may be the opportunity that our members may close their practices down and need somewhere to work. So we are looking into alternative ways of working as an extra sort of membership service. One thing you were talking about as well was, you talked about denial, and my parents always used to joke that denial was a river in Egypt. We come in Australia, we have a fairly blokey culture, and do you see a pandemic like this shifting the emotions of modern day Australians to engage and talk about mental health? I know there's been a significant push in this space over the last few years, where it has been deemed very acceptable and normal to consider mental health the same as an affliction like a cold or some other infection. But do you see that the pandemic swinging Australia to a more appreciated understanding of collaborating on mental health issues as a psychologist?
I'm not sure I can answer that for you, because I guess I'm so much in the space that, certainly, for example, Medicare has made it extremely easy for people to access psychological support, which is a change. I think there are probably a lot more online resources available regarding mental health. I think particularly actually in mental health, the College of Psychiatrists are making a big push. I suppose the push that I sense is that people are trying to move away from this self-identification with our work roles and nurture and celebrate our interpersonal relationships more, to understand that that's something we can still do, albeit virtually, and that is also very important. So it may well open up better discussion between people about mental health issues. In a way, just by first principles, it must do, mustn't it? Because we're all talking about how we're feeling today, and that's not how we felt yesterday. It's making it clear that emotions are fluid and changing, and that's a great first step.
Yeah, very true. I haven't seen any other questions come through the chat. So what I would say, we have had some questions related to accessing the slides. I did want to let everybody know that the slides would be available after this. And as usual, we're recording this session, so we'll be uploading that later on this afternoon as well. I know you've got another Zoom call to get to in a few minutes, Christine.
There's no massive rush if anybody had a question. Yeah.
Good stuff. As you can see on the chat, we have now uploaded the slides, so they are available at our dedicated COVID member lean-in recording page as well. I do want to say, just in closing, I think this has been really helpful. You are the final presenter. We've had a number of sessions dedicated to mental health, and we're now going to go back really into looking at key issues affecting the profession moving onwards. But I do want to really thank you for your time. This has been very valuable, allowing us to identify the key triggers that have provoked uncertainty, anxiety, depression, anger, all of those sort of things that those moods and those the environments that we've been finding ourselves in have been quite alien. So this has been very helpful to us. So I just want to express our thanks on behalf of the Institute. It's been really a fantastic session, and thank you so much for the evident effort that you've put into presenting this for us. So thank you again. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of today's rather quick Zoom session. We're only 40 minutes in, but hopefully you enjoyed that. As always, I've been Michael Linke. I'm the General Manager here at the Institute. Thank you so much for joining with us.